I'm Brandon Ranges. I'm the senior curator here at the Missoula Art Museum. It's been my honor and privilege to work with Dagny, as well as John Kalsbeek was here a moment ago, to put this show together. And it's been really great that Dagny's been working on it throughout her long residency at the Zooton Arts Community Center, and really preparing the work. And we felt it's really great when you get an artist that's working on a specific body of work for a specific space for a long period of time. You get magical results like this. So I think it's pretty incredible. You probably all know that MAM has a strong dedication to contemporary Native artists, both with the gallery next door, the Frost Gallery, Linda M. Frost Gallery for Contemporary American Indian Art, and then with our collection dedication. And I feel like you're pretty lucky because you get to see both tonight. The downstairs exhibition is one of our 50th birthday exhibitions. This is our 50th anniversary this year. And so we pulled works from the collection, and you're able to see those downstairs. With that collection and with the gallery, we're really committed to representing contemporary indigenous artistic expression, both faithfully and collaboratively. And we recognize the ongoing sovereignty of the Salish and Kalispel tribal people, who I wanted to remind all of us agreed through treaty to live in peace with the settlers on this land. We really feel like tribal people inspire MAM's efforts to create and maintain a beloved and inclusive community, and we respect the original sacrifice that have been made by Indigenous people. I think that's really important as you look around this gallery, and I'm so grateful to Dagny for kind of this ongoing conversation that this gallery has prompted about settler colonialism. And I think it's really a difficult subject to talk about, much more so to visualize. And so it's kind of amazing that we have these opportunities to have all these conversations about what indigeneity looks like, what settler colonialism looks like, this feeling that Dagny expresses of not dead native people, but actually the land haunting, that feeling of being haunted by the misdeeds of settler colonialism. It's really interesting and powerful, and we're looking forward to that conversation continuing. It's been really great that it's prompted a lot of questions and a lot of inquiry, both with individual viewers and then discussions with the staff. I did want to point this out. We have a little cheat sheet that you can take with you. There's some on the table out front and also downstairs at the front desk. But we have a multi-age collage workshop tomorrow morning from 11 to 12:30. So if anybody wants to get their collage on, that's the way to do it. Art Around the Corner, which is ongoing downstairs, that has collage elements related to Dagny's exhibition. And then we have a kind of an experimental flash fiction kind of wonderful thing that Dagny's wife Alexandra was the juror for, the judge for, and it really worked out well that we invited people in. We said, use these pieces as points of departure, and had wonderful authors respond in turn and submit little pieces of flash fiction that will be read on Wednesday, March 12th from 5 to 7. I think we'll do, just like we did tonight, kind of have a gathering at 5 o'clock, and then the reading will start at 5:30 or something like that. But Dagny has been so generous in giving away prints to the first, second, and third place prize winners, which, woo-hoo, anytime there's free art, right? I don't think, I was going to pretend I was going to read all these notes for an introduction. It's really just the gallery close sign. Without further ado, I'm wondering if you can help me welcome Dagny and turn it over to Dagny. Thank you. I'll go inside. Yeah.
How's this?
That'll be better.
How's this?
Good.
Okay.
Very authoritative.
Thank you. Oh, thank you so much. I appreciate that. Wow. Thank you all so much for coming. This is quite the turnout. This has been a long time coming. You know, like Brendan said, I made a lot of this work, almost all of this work, while in residence at the Zootown Arts Community Center. I started working on this show back in like March or April of 2023. And this show opened on December 20th of this year, or excuse me, of last year. And we really just kicked programming off for it just last week. So it's been a long time of sitting on this work, of thinking about this work in isolation, right? And it's just been such a pleasure to finally get out into the community and interface with people about it in the actual gallery space. So thank you again all so much for coming. Before I get into, I'm not going to talk for too long because it's First Friday and there's a ton of things downtown to do tonight. But before we really get into the meat of the exhibition, I want to share a quick story. I've told this story before, so I'm sorry if you've already heard it, but it's the seed of the exhibition, right? Every single print in this room somehow relates or refers back to this moment, this experience I had driving to Kalispell a couple of years ago with my partner, Alexandra. It was my first time going to Kalispell, and it was my first time seeing the Mission Mountains. It was July of 2022, and it was just this outstandingly clear day, right? Like just the bluest kind of skies, very sparse clouds, very little haze in the atmosphere, right? That you could just see for miles. And we were driving up the hill that you ascend before you plunge into the Mission Valley. And I didn't realize that the missions were going to be right on the other side of that hill. They were a total surprise. And so we crested the hill. I saw the missions for the first time. I was driving, and I just about took us right off the road. They were just so I'm sure many of you in this room have seen the missions. They're so charismatic, right? So present, so prominent and powerful in that landscape. And on that day in particular, they were so stark, right? Just this towering wall of black rock set against the sky. And it was a beautiful moment, right? Obviously, it was beautiful. But it wasn't the beauty of that scene that staggered me so much, right? I literally felt my hands shake on the wheel. It wasn't the beauty of the missions that struck me. It was this sudden and very unexpected jolt of fear. Like a gut shot of fear in the face of this mountain range. It was a fear unlike I'd ever felt before. I've never felt it since, but I have been looking for it, right? I want to feel that again. I'll get to that in a moment. It felt like it came from some primeval place, right? This caveman sense of terror in the face of the natural world, in the face of this entity of the natural world. And the fear came to me with a thought, too, and that thought came from a place so deep and hidden away that I think I'd forgotten that it really even existed. And the thought was, those mountains are alive. And my wife was sitting next to me, and we were just kind of sitting in silence looking out at the mountains, and I swear to God, you said, "Do you think those mountains are watching us?" I was like, "Oh yeah, I do." Yes, that is exactly what I feel. That's exactly what I feel. And that moment, that shared and spontaneous moment of awe and terror in the face of the natural world kicked off this conversation about, I think it was kind of uninformed at the time, but it was still an illustrative and inspirational conversation about animism. And animism is the core of this show. Animism, an animist idea of the landscape as alive and watching and thoughtful, right? Sentient. Everything in this show traces back to, I think, this momentary glimpse I had of the world as animate. So animism, if you're not familiar with it, is the idea, and it's present, it's a spiritual belief that we find present and repeated throughout so many different religious structures and systems across time and place and cultures. Animism is the idea that everything, absolutely everything in the world is alive, right? Alive and sentient. Humans, obviously, yes, animals and insects, but also every facet of the natural world, big and small, right? The largest redwood down to the tiniest microbe, right? The hillsides and the snow and the rivers, and the constructed world too, the manufactured sphere, your car, your watch, your clothes, your dishware, your trash, all of it is alive. And animism ascribes the same level, different ideas of, I would say, perception, but the same level of consciousness to an inanimate object as we would understand it in more, modern Western rationalism. Animism ascribes those objects the same level of consciousness as we ascribe to people. And I can stand up here and I can talk about animism, but I'm not an animist, right? I really wish I was, to be honest. I wish I was a lot of things. And one of those things is I wish I was someone who was able to believe in something like that. I wish I was someone who was able to have a more spiritual outlook on the world. I feel a great deal of envy and admiration, I think, for people who follow a religion, who pray to a God, because that's just something that I don't think I can ever fully be capable of. And yet, on an intellectual level, I'm fascinated by ideas like animism, fascinated by spirituality and religion and mythology and the occult and like pseudoscience and magic, all of these things, right, these elements that exist outside of our sort of standard ideas of, physical perception within the world. So whenever I have an opportunity to fold something spiritual or some spiritual idea into my artwork, I seize it. I think that, in a way, my art practice is the only place where I do feel fully able to give myself over to faith. I think my art is an altar at which I very, very rarely allow myself to pray. So I look for opportunities like that. And it struck me when I first started investigating animism and becoming interested in it, how well I could fold it into my sort of greater corpus, right? If you've been following my work for a couple of years, you know that my bread and butter as an artist is the American West, right? It's what I do. It's my muse. It's an endless well of inspiration for me. I'm always trying to find, new perspectives, right? New angles from which to investigate the American West, new subjects or topics to parse over and distill those investigations into artwork. And it struck me how, not well necessarily, but how interesting a pairing of the American West and animism would be. I think that they're complementary in how antithetical they are to each other. I think that animism and the American West see the world from two entirely different perspectives, right? On the one hand, you have animism that begs its believers to see themselves as incredibly small. I mean, just outstandingly tiny creatures within this massive collective, right? So small as to be practically immeasurable. And because of that, and because I think of the sort of egalitarian nature, right, of giving the same level of sentience as you would to a human to a discarded shoe, right, or a soda can out on the pavement, it asks people to see themselves, to humble themselves before everything else in the world around them, and to understand how their presence, their actions, their place in the world affects everything else around them, both physically and otherwise, right? I think that animism approaches the world from a very empathetic, cooperative, and collectivist point of view. And the American West is not like that, right? Like the American West is, I think we we fetishize individualism. You know, we love the idea of toughing it out on your own out here, of pulling yourself up by your bootstraps, right? All of these sayings, right? I think that that is present just generally in the United States, but I think it has a particular hold on the American West. And I think that that traces back to our history here. You know, you look back at the early to mid 1800s when you had this flood of people pouring out from the eastern states into the Western landscape in pursuit of manifest destiny, right? Whatever that meant to them. And I think that that mindset prizes an individualistic pursuit of ambition and desire over everything else, and certainly over the collective, right? We read all these accounts of people who abandoned everything that they had, literally everything, cut all of their ties back east just to come out west, right? In pursuit of, again, this nebulous idea of manifest destiny. We have this, as an example, we have this heartbreaking letter sent from Tamsin Donner of the Donner Party to her sister. And she posted it in Independence, Missouri. And it's just this brutal and very blunt recognition, acknowledgement of the fact that that was goodbye, right? They would never see each other again. And it wasn't like their relationship ended with animosity. There's no antagonism in the letter. That was just the reality, right? The Donners, Tamsin and her immediate family, left for the American West, and they knew that they were leaving everything behind them. I think that that was just the nature of seizing that opportunity. It, again, prizes an individual pursuit of ambition above collective welfare. So, again, the two ideas just seemed immediately in contention with each other. I think that that contention is on display in this gallery, right? Every piece in here reflects a moment, I think, of violence, of aggression, of contradiction, again, of contention between the cowboys, right, the archetype of the American West, and these spirits that have risen out of the landscape. Phantasmal figures of the landscape made flesh somehow, right? Geysers, volcanic eruptions, mountains, forests, and forest fires. And I think that there's a power dynamic, like a shift of the power dynamic there. So all these are collages, right? And all of the cowboy figures that I pulled for those collages, they come from, 1940s public domain pulp novels and comic book covers and things like that. And in that original media, these cowboy figures are, the protagonist, right? They're somehow the aggressor. They're somehow this active party. They're sometimes a bully, right? But in this context, I think that power dynamic has been flipped. And now it's, again, these specters come out of nature to chase down, torment, and terrorize these cowboy figures. And I think if there's one singular emotional current that runs through this show, it's a current of fear. Again, that same kind of fear, right? An existential terror in the face of a landscape made flesh, a landscape made vengeful spirit coming after you. And that's a fear that I think I felt for one very poignant moment before the missions. But I think it's something that I've carried with me for a very long time. I'm from the American West, right? I was born and raised in Colorado. Went off to Canada for undergrad. And as soon as I graduated, I was right back here, right? I was back in Montana. And I have a very complicated relationship with the American West. It's my home. And it's really the only home that I want and the only home I think I could ever fully know. But I don't think I fully belong here either. I feel out of place. I feel apart from this landscape, again, at odds with this landscape. I think that part of that certainly comes from, now that I'm older and have come to sort of understand my place in the world more, it comes from, I think, a passed down guilt of being, a person who has benefited from who was passed down from a system of settler colonial violence. But I also think that it's just some innate and ephemeral relationship with the landscape that I've always had. My mom came up for this, for the opening, and she can attest to this, that we were like a really outdoorsy family. We did a lot of like hiking and camping when I was a kid. Oh, and I hated it. I could not stand it. I never enjoyed myself. I was always so on edge, so tense, like I could not. I knew that people like you and Pop and Emma, you guys would feel so like at ease in the landscape. I could never feel that. I could never connect, I think, with the landscape like other people could. And I just had, I think, a moment of clarity about that literally last November when all of this work had already been made. It was like a linchpin, a moment that clarified my relationship with the Western landscape. And I wasn't even in America when it happened. So I'd finished all the work. It was all over at the Art Attic Frame Shop. And I left the country. I went to Scandinavia for 2 weeks with Alexandra and a friend of ours. And we jaunted around, Denmark and Norway and Sweden for a couple of weeks. And the final leg of the journey was this tiny little town in Norway called Fjærland. And Fjærland sat on Fjærlands Fjord, which is the largest fjord in Norway. And it butted up against this massive glacier, right? I think it was one of the largest glaciers in Norway. It had all of these tongues that extended out into the landscape. And we spent the last couple days of the trip just going out into nature and hiking up all of these little state park areas that the Norwegian government had set up outside of these glacial tongues. And we went to this one, and all of these places were unmanned, right? It was the end of the tourist season. There was no one there. These trails weren't maintained. There were hardly trails at all. They do parks very differently over in Europe, I think. They're just kind of vague suggestions of where you should go to get as close as you possibly could to the glacier. And we went to this one state park that was set in a valley, and on either side of that valley were these two incredibly steep slopes that ended off in these beautifully rounded caps, right, that had been polished over by just hundreds of thousands of years of the glacier dragging over them. And at the top of one of those slopes was one of the glacial tongues. And out of that tongue came this thundering waterfall, right, glacial melt that spilled into a pool that led off into a creek that went off into the fjord. And so we're climbing up this slope, if you could call it that. It was a really perilous hike. A, it was a really steep slope. B, it was covered in rockfall. And C, none of those rocks would stay still under your feet. Because of just this constant thunderous power of that waterfall coming off of the glacier, the entire landscape around your feet, under your feet, was in motion, constantly moving, constantly changing. You would take a step and the entire, shelf of rock underneath you would just fall away. All of us fell down like 3 times. There are all these signs everywhere too, right? Like caution tape telling you not to go into a certain area. A sign that was like, don't come over here. A sign that was like, don't cross the water here. A sign at the trailhead in like 10 languages that said like, if a part of the glacier breaks off, run. Like get out of there as fast as you possibly can. So it felt like a very treacherous area. And yet I could not have been more content. Like I could not have been calmer. I think I finally understood what it means to be comfortable in nature, right? To connect with nature, to feel at ease in nature. That was something that I had never felt before in the American West. And something that I don't know if I ever will, I don't see myself necessarily as having a physical place here, right? A spot carved out for me in the actual landscape. And so this show, This Land is Haunted, it's about a haunted landscape. Yes, it's about a landscape that haunts you, but I think it's also been my own way of parsing through my own relationship with the American West. I feel like a ghost here, somehow physically tethered to the landscape and yet removed from it, apart from it, not belonging to it or settled within it. I think that my relationship with it has been and always will be somehow defined by this overwhelming sense of fear. I think that's all I wanted to say. So thank you. I will be taking questions. You want the mic?
I just wanted to invite everyone back for March 26th. We're going to have a reception with many of the artists that are down in the Good Relations exhibition. Several local artists and then a special guest artist that's coming in from Matrix Press, Dwayne Slick. And then Jason Clark's exhibition is going to be celebrated the first Friday. So you'll notice the whole top floor of the museum is devoted to printmaking, printmaking strong. And
Yeah.